Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be discussing my top 5 favorite Star Trek Voyager books and series. Now, Star Trek Voyager is one of those interesting Star Trek series that it never really gained the traction that the other shows had. It had great episodes, moments, but it never really got the fandom that the original series or that Next Generation had. However, it is my favorite Star Trek series, and I love the books regarding it. I've read a lot of them. I have not read anywhere near all of them. The first book on my list is going to be Star Trek Voyager, the 16th book in the series, 7 of 9 by Christie Golden. This book came out a few months after they introduced the character of 7 of 9 in the 4th season of Star Trek Voyager. Now, this book is really short. It's about 215 pages, and what makes this book interesting is that they really gave Christie Golden an opportunity to put a spotlight on the character in the literature. Up until this point, she hadn't really existed, and no one really was allowed to write the character much in the ongoing Voyager line because they didn't know how the show was going to handle everything. Once they did get a handle on that, they gave it to Christie Golden. She had already previously written 2 Star Trek Voyager novels. Up to this point, she wrote the Star Trek Voyager, The Murdered Sun, as well as Marooned. And so she was already ingratiating herself in the Star Trek universe. And so when they gave her this book, she wrote a novel that is very close to one of the episodes. I believe the episode is called The Raven. I'll have to go back and look later, but that is an episode that basically has a very similar plot. 7 of 9 starts having flashbacks in this book, and it starts causing her to realize that there's something important in her past that she's trying to deal with, and so she gets all the rest of the Voyager crew to help her with that kind of unintentionally. And I think this is just a fun, quick little novel. I really can't go further into it because it's spoilers and this is such a short book, but it's a really enjoyable book to read. So that's my number 5. The number 4 on my list is actually a full trilogy that I'm going to discuss, and that trilogy is the String Theory trilogy. The first book, Cohesion, is written by Jeffrey Lang. The second book is Fusion, written by Kirsten Beyer. And the third book is Evolution, written by Heather Jarman. Now, this trilogy was particularly interesting because this was written for the 10th anniversary of Voyager. The show's been off the air. Christie Golden had finished her Homecoming duology and her Spirit Walk duology, and Christie Golden had pretty much said, I'm done in Star Trek. And so they didn't have anyone carrying on the Voyager line. They didn't really know where to go with it. So for the 10th anniversary, they went back and filled in one of the gaps in the actual series. In between seasons 4 and season 5, there's a big choice that is made that Janeway makes, and you don't know why she makes that choice. And this book trilogy in particular explains why that choice is made, why she decides to take the long route home instead of a shorter, quicker potential one. We also, in this trilogy, you get a lot more development of some of the characters, particularly Tom and B'Elanna's relationship gets fleshed out a lot. And the character that I didn't particularly love, Neelix, gets more fleshed out in this trilogy. And other characters show up. I don't want to give spoilers on them, but some of the characters from earlier episodes of Star Trek Voyager show up. And this one, I had never heard of the idea of string theory, but this trilogy explains it real well in a scientific terms, while at the same time telling a good, fun trilogy. And so this is just, if you just are a big fan of Voyager, this is just a big anniversary book trilogy that is really worth your time. And so that is my number 4 on my list. My number 3 on my list, I've already mentioned this author once, and that's because she did a good job with Voyager, and that is going to be Christie Golden with her Homecoming duology. Now, these books, much like her last book, are short than a lot of more modern Star Trek books, but they're actually quite long for her. These books are, the second one's about 280 pages, and the first book is about 260 pages. And this duology picks up immediately after Endgame, Star Trek Voyager Endgame, the finale of Voyager. What this duology does is it basically sets the board for the future of Star Trek Voyager. Explains what happens with Janeway, what happens with 709 and Chakotay's relationship, what happens with Harry when he gets back with his friends, what happens with Tom and B'Elanna. A lot of that stuff is explored, and you really see the disconnect that is created between the Voyager crew and the people of Earth and the Federation. And you really understand the bond that is created, that they can't ingratiate themselves into society again. And this duology just did that perfectly. There's also a Borg subplot in this book that the Borg, around this time, the early 2000s, were done pretty much to death. And there were some examples that they were done amazingly well, and there were some examples where they weren't done well. This is kind of in the middle. It was done all right, but the Voyager, or the Borg subplot is not the driving subplot of this series. The real subplot of this series, or the real driving force of it, is the crew coming home, and I just really enjoyed this. I have not yet gotten to the duology after this, the Spirit Walk duology, but if it's anything like this, it's certainly good. And this is also, these were the first Star Trek Voyager books that I ever read, and I think it is an excellent jumping off point. You can read these without having read any of the other Voyager books, and it actually gives you substantial story and changes to character, whereas some of the books that came out before this didn't really do that. They weren't allowed to explore. The universe as much. But now, since Voyager was over, this is the first of what they call the relaunch for Voyager. So this is my number 3 on my list. The number 2 on my list, we're skipping a bit ahead in the plot line, is Star Trek Voyager: The Eternal Tide. Now, this is the 4th book in the Full Circle line by Kirsten Beyer, and really it is the event book in that series. The first one was Full Circle, and then you had Unworthy and Children of the Storm, and then you have Eternal Tide. And so the 1st and 4th books are the 2 event books, things where big things are happening, and the middle books kind of just are getting you there. And this book, while it looks fairly short, it's actually just shy of 400 pages. What makes this book so good is that it explores the Q, it explores Janeway's psyche, it explores the whole Voyager cast really well. Kirsten Beyer was the best single person at balancing everyone's storylines so that everyone got a subplot. She did a really good job with that with all of her books, and this is no different. What makes this book is it's big. Around this time, you had Cisco coming back in DS9 in bigger ways than ever. You had other characters from other series. You had Data coming back from the Next Generation, and you have Janeway coming back from something that happens to her earlier in the series, and it's just a wonderful book. It is explosive. This is, in terms of epic things happening, this is the biggest Star Trek Voyager book that's out there. This book has the most destruction, the most action, the most intrigue, all that stuff, and so this is my number 2 favorite Star Trek Voyager book. The number 1 book on my list, you've probably heard it before because I always rave about it because it is one of the best Star Trek books ever written, and that is Full Circle. Now, Full Circle is the longest Star Trek book I've ever read. It's over 500 pages, which for pocketbooks was a long book back in the day. I'm sure there are some books that beat it in length. I just haven't read them yet. But what makes this book so good is Kirsten had to play a lot of catch-up in the series. That, ever since 2004, when the Spirit Walk duology came out from Christie Golden, there hadn't been any Star Trek Voyager after that. And so when you had Destiny come out in 2008, and it blew up the Star Trek universe, and you had other books come out that tied into Destiny that had big impacts for the Voyager crew, but was not about the Voyager crew, they needed someone who could kind of fill in the audience, fill in the gaps, tell the whole story of before Destiny, the events of Destiny, and after Destiny. And this book does all of that. It's really 2 books smushed into 1 book. The first half of the book is just a fun adventure with Janeway and the whole Voyager crew going out to help B'Elanna and Tom with something that they're having to deal with their daughter. And then something happens in the middle of the book that causes a huge rift, and the second half of the book is a response to Destiny. And this book, just, you feel the pain of the characters, you feel the sadness, the overwhelming fatigue that they all have. And there's a bit of hope in the book, and as it says, the title, Full Circle, Voyager does at the end of the book come full circle for the entire Voyager series. And it was a brilliant move on both Kirsten and the writing group's team to decide to put Voyager where they put Voyager going forward. And this would be the first of, I believe, a 10-book series of ongoing Star Trek books from about 2009 when this came out to 2020 when the final book of the series came out, To Lose the Earth. And it's just a wonderful kickoff, and is the one Voyager book that feels like they let the author go at it. Eternal Tide felt like that as well, but this book as well, and she balanced continuity, original storytelling, characters, and dialogue all very well. It was a perfectly balanced book, and it is an excellent book. It is also an excellent starting place, but I recommend you have read Destiny. I did not, and so there were times I wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but this book is great if you're jumping into Voyager. She does catch you up if you haven't read any of the previous books, like the Homecoming or Spirit Walk duologies. She does catch you up significantly on those books. But I do heavily recommend this. This is my number 1 favorite Star Trek Voyager book. So there are many other books I could have gotten to, many great Star Trek Voyager books. There are some duds as well, unfortunately, but overall, it's a very good series. It is the one series that it's the one TV series that is the most enhanced by the books, in my opinion. DS9 was already pretty well enhanced as a series. The books are great, but it didn't need it. Voyager needed that enhancement, and so that's why the books have such a place in my heart. But if you've read any of Voyager books, let me know which ones are your favorites. Are you surprised that I included any? Are there some that I should have included and some that I should not have included? Let me know. But until next time, you can like the channel, you can subscribe, you can comment, you can share it with your friends. And my name is Jonathan Cohn, and thank you for watching.